I met Ethan the summer I turned 12, on the cracked courts behind the community centre. He was shorter than me then, wiry, eyes that darted like he was cataloguing everything, and a laugh that drew people in. I remember thinking, on that first day, he tossed the basketball at me, grin wide. "You're it, Alex," he said, and I felt that immediate click, the kind of click that suggests something easy, something that could become a habit. We became inseparable, almost instantly. School, weekends, after classes, homework sprawled on my bed while Ethan ripped apart the latest comic book and then told me how the plot should have gone. We drank from the same fountain, borrowed each other's jackets, hid snacks in backpacks, the small rituals of friendship. Our houses were 2 blocks apart, so mother and father both treated the other like an unofficial relative. We shared secrets like kids' trading cards. I told him about my first crush, he told me about the fight with his dad. We promised things, the kind of promises that feel eternal at 12. We'll start a band. We'll open a shop. We'll never be like those people who stop talking. Time, as it always does, rearranged priorities. High school came, girls came, grades came, and still, Ethan was there, in the front seat during long drives, waiting on the other side of one more exam. We argued occasionally. He liked to get a rise out of teachers, taking jokes too far. I was more cautious. I cared about the lines people drew. But those quarrels melted by Sunday, over fries and cheap cola, while we planned futures in the dim light of his bedroom. When I turned 20, we moved into a tiny apartment together. His energy made the place feel larger than it should be. We joked about how grown up we were, paying bills, grocery lists, that solitary, adult comedy. We taught ourselves things, coding, basic accounting, how to install shelves. Our biggest shared idea, the one that consumed nights, started as a stupid comment over coffee. What if we just made this easier? Ethan rubbed his chin, eyes bright. An app, he said. Something nobody wants yet, that everybody needs. We started small. Prototype weekends, sticky notes smeared on the kitchen wall like a piece of modern art, cheap pizza boxes strewn on the table, caffeine and ambition. The app, at first, was clumsy, a simple platform to help small local sellers reach customers without the fees of big marketplaces. It was, in its essence, a thing born out of irritation. Ethan and I hated seeing friends overcharge shipping or lose money to invisible commissions. It felt like doing the world a favor. I remember the first investor meeting. My hand shook, Ethan's didn't. He stood with the casual, relaxed posture of someone who trusted charm would carry him. He smiled at old men with money, made jokes about college dorm meals, and then, quietly, he presented the spreadsheet I had made at 3 a.m. I had done the math, the projections, the practical side. He slid it in like a magic trick. The first investor nodded slowly, then asked questions we had rehearsed, and they did something small. They believed us. We launched the beta version to friends, then to the neighborhood, then to a handful of small businesses. The first month felt like tasting success. One bakery recorded a full day's worth of orders. A local craftsman managed his first sale. I felt proud, and Ethan felt alive. That was the intoxicating part, when your mediocre nights are suddenly all for something that could be more. Then the crack started. Not in the product. In us. It began with a missed meeting. I remember checking the calendar, flipping through emails, and finding a message from a lawyer with a note I didn't understand. Ethan's answer was nonchalant. I handled it. I trusted him, because trust between roommates, between friends, becomes almost an instinct. Later, I found a contract in his drawer, paper thick with slick signatures, and my name missing. It mentioned major partnerships. It promised equity, and the numbers were such that anyone else would see the company's potential. But my name, the co-founders, was not there. It was only Ethan's. I confronted him in the kitchen. He shrugged, like a man admitting a small, inevitable truth. They prefer one face, he said. They like charisma. You do the code, Alex. I do the talking. It should have been a red flag, but by then the investors' money had paid the hosting bills and we were hiring our first contractor. Pride and momentum silenced my suspicion. I told myself it was a negotiation tactic, a temporary arrangement, nothing that would cost me the work I had already put in. Then the messages started, the subtle things that erode trust, meetings I didn't know about, calls taken in the bathroom, a new email account with recruiters copied, an extra layer of secrecy. Ethan grew distant in the way that made you uncomfortable, always just beyond the boundaries of what he had always been. He seemed happier, lighter. That should have been warning enough. One night, I walked into an investor dinner unannounced, and I saw Ethan laughing across the room with a man who had the kind of smile that cost money. They raised glasses to plans I had not seen. When Ethan saw me, his face did a strange pivot, the kind of pivot actors do on stage when the script changes, and he called me over with a carefully practiced warmth. It was outside, in the rain, that I watched him charm people into backing a version of our project that favored him in every single clause. My name was reduced to an afterthought, a technical founder, which in meeting speak translates to, we paid him in work, not in voice. I tried to say something afterwards, to make sense of the hairline splits that had become a canyon. He told me, quietly, that I needed to be more assertive. You don't know how to sell it, Alex, he said. You're a scientist, not a showman. It stung, but I felt it more as shame than as betrayal. I had let him do the talker's part for too long. Then, the betrayal took a sharp, personal turn. I had been dating Lila on and off for 3 years, a quiet, honest person who made my messy apartment feel like home. She was patient when code crashed, supportive when failures crushed me. She liked the smell of basil and read poetry at bus stops. Lila and Ethan had always been cordial. They would exchange jokes at the fridge, her sarcasm matched by his smile. I never watched their interactions closely. I never imagined a wedge between the people who loved me in different ways. The first hint came from someone else, Jenna, a former college friend I bumped into at the coffee shop. She said, casual, have you seen Lila and Ethan together? They looked cute. I laughed it off. Small talk and rumors swirl in coffee shops. But the unease gnawed at me. Then, one evening, I went home early from a meeting, because something inside me had that stupid, irrational hunch. I heard voices, the muffled kind that suggest privacy. I stepped through the doorway and froze. Lila was on the couch, laughing at something Ethan said. He was close to her, too close, like the air between them had been rearranged. Their knees touched, their hands found excuses to be near. Lila's face was different, not ashamed, not hiding. She looked content. For a moment I thought I was misreading everything. That affection could mean many things. But as the weeks unraveled, small signs multiplied. Hidden messages, nights when Lila smelled of wine and perfume, Ethan's laptop huddled in the corner with a password he refused to share. I confronted Lila in the late hours. She told me, without melodrama, that she and Ethan had something that made sense to them. She used words like different, and we grew, words that make betrayal sound like evolution. She did not apologize. She did not deny anything. She said, simply, I'm sorry you're hurt, with a sincerity that was less sorrow and more pity. That pity dug into me. It was worse than rage. Pity implies you are small, that you failed in a way that required sympathy. After that, my life became an oscillating pattern of grief and rage. I saw Ethan differently. His jokes seemed rehearsed. His hugs were territorial. Lila moved out, quietly, with a suitcase and a smile for the carton of our broken plant. My family circled their own dramas. Some tried to console, others pretended not to see. I worked through lines of code like a man trying to stitch up a wound with needles. The app launched, and the world loved it. We got press, the numbers climbed, and I felt a hollow quality to every success. Ethan danced interviews like a man who had captured a prize, but in my chest, there was a small, steady ache. In public, I tried to act like myself. In private, I descended. For months I avoided calling friends. I quit attending meetups. I stopped eating well. Nights became long, and each one seemed to weigh the next with bad dreams. I remember walking down the river one night, the chill raising gooseflesh on my arms, and thinking of how easily life unstitched itself. The word self-harm entered my thoughts as a fog enters a room, sinister and uninvited. I had never felt that close to the edge before, and I hated myself for the weakness, hated the way the mind could bend to such designs. But something else happened in that darkness, something stubborn and small, the part of me that loved problem-solving, that had always felt numbly at home when a difficult line of code refused to compile. I clung to that. I started to plan, in small steps, get some exercise, talk to a therapist, do a weekend job that kept me present. I spoke to one of our early users, an elderly man who had cried on the phone telling me how our platform saved his small shop. His gratitude felt like light through a small window. It mattered, even when the world around me felt indifferent. The next turn in the story, the one that would later make me shake my head in disbelief, involved an email. It had no subject, only a dry name, compliance. I opened it and read a forwarded line from a corporate attorney. Someone had raised concerns about a series of invoices that had been routed through third parties tied to Ethan's personal accounts. The contracts he had signed, the ones that didn't include me, had clauses that funneled funds into consulting channels that bore his name. I felt the dizziness return, not from betrayal this time, but from discovery. The company's accounts were not as clean as their press releases. We staged a meeting. The board, small but influential, sat like judges. Ethan arrived with the calm of a man who knows how to perform serenity. He told the same stories he told investors, how he had been the bridge, the charm, the person who took vision into the room. He smiled, made jokes. The numbers were messy. I showed the auditors my drafts, my spreadsheets, emails with timestamps proving my work. They nodded politely. But the legal language, the slick clauses, the way influence works, meant something else. In the end, the board moved to a settlement, a public statement of amicable restructuring, and a private deal that left me with a small package and a vow of silence. The settlement made me legally bound to not disparage the company, to accept payments that were a fraction of what I could have demanded. Ethan walked away with a large equity stake, and, more damagingly, with the narrative polished, Ethan led the commercialization. He became the darling of product columns. I, meanwhile, disappeared into the background, paid off like an inconvenient invoice. I should have felt anger like a cleansing fire, but bitterness is a slow, cold thing. I sank into private grief, then a more organized despair. I tried businesses that failed. I designed a line of clever kitchen gadgets that people ignored. I wrote a book no one published. I took temp jobs, code gigs that paid the bills and nothing more. Some mornings, the bed felt like a heavy thing I could not move from. Some nights, I would imagine the finality of stepping off the edge. I never planned the how, only the what, how the pain would end. Thinking that way scared me, but the thoughts existed like bruises. And in the middle of this aching, a twist happened that I did not expect. The twist was small, and it started with a message from someone whose name I had not seen in years. Jenna, the same friend from the coffee shop. She had been a quiet witness to events, a neighbor who had seen interactions through the window of her own life. Her message said simply, "Meet me." We met in a quiet bakery, and she slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos, screenshots, notes. She had been watching Ethan in a web of transactions, and she had compiled them, not out of malice, but out of outrage. "He thinks he's untouchable," she said, eyes sharp. "He uses people like a deck of cards. He convinced me to help him, once. I left. Now I want to fix what I can." Her folder was a patchwork. It hinted at an irregular flow of consultancy payments, a series of small, shell transactions that funded a life slightly larger than Ethan's salary could have afforded. It also contained something else, emails where Ethan boasted to a friend about how easy it was to redirect credit for new features into personal accounts. It was not clean evidence for court, not yet, but it suggested a pattern. We did something reckless. We reached out to a journalist who had a nose for tech fraud. We fed the story, carefully, anonymously. The journalist called Ethan's publicist, who called him, and suddenly the world that had applauded him began to ask questions. The board, uncomfortable, initiated a deeper audit. Ethan, who had always been cool in public, began to crack in private. Calls came late at night from people he had previously charmed, disgruntled contractors, creditors, someone who had been cut out of a supposed consultancy payment. The pattern was not a single act. It was a career of friendly deceptions. But here is the second twist, the one that snuck up on me like a shadow. When the audit revealed evidence of misallocated funds, Ethan did not fall. He had, over the years, invested in people, in public relations, in a set of lawyers who made sure he always had an exit route. The company agreed to a restructuring that involved Ethan stepping down from day-to-day operations but keeping a large silent stake, with a legal requirement to avoid any public disparagement. He was contained, but not destroyed. He walked away with dignity intact, like a magician who had lost only the rabbits but kept the hat. What happened to me was quieter. The audit vindicated some of my suspicions, and yet, because of the settlement and my signatures on earlier documents, the world still saw me as a co-founder who had taken a modest role. In private, some people were shocked and sympathetic. In public, the headlines read like careful law briefs, company restructures amid financial scrutiny, with a paragraph on the board's careful prudence. Ethan's name was there, but so was everyone else's. The narrative had been diluted by the corporate law machine. I thought I would feel triumphant. Instead, I felt exhausted. The fight had drained me. There was a hollow in the triumph that I did not expect. But the story did not end there, and this is the part one want anyone listening to pay attention to. Recovery does not shout, it whispers in the small things. It began with meetings at a community center where I volunteered to teach coding to teenagers. Their hunger for knowledge reminded me why I had loved building things in the first place. I learned to be patient in a new way. I reconnected with friends who had slipped away during my darkest months. I dated, awkwardly, with a cautious heart. Then I fell, slowly, into a relationship with Maya, who taught pottery classes and had a laugh that could break the shell of the worst day. She did not ask about my past constantly. She noticed things, the way I listened, the way I could quietly fix a stubborn problem without needing applause. Maya and I married in a small ceremony 6 years after the settlement. It was not a headline. It was a table of close friends, a backyard with string lights, and the smell of coffee. We had a daughter, Nora, who slept on mine and Maya's chests in those early months. Her breath a small, steady promise. Life, in its slow way, stitched new seams. Ethan occasionally crossed my newsfeed. He married someone younger than me, someone whose photos suggested a life of opulence. He posted motivational quotes. He did not deny the audit. He did not take to social media to proclaim his innocence with the righteous fury of a martyr. He continued, like a man who had learned how to keep moving. Part of me wanted to despise him, to wish him ruin. I tried that for a month, a year. Hatred, I discovered, is a heavy garment to carry alone. The final twist, the strangest one, came at a reunion, a gathering of former colleagues, organized in a neutral space, the sort of event for nostalgia and networking. I had been invited, out of duty more than curiosity. I walked in, and there he was, Ethan, looking older, perhaps a little more careful. He saw me, and he approached. I braced for a performance. He stopped a respectful distance away and, to my surprise, offered a simple sentence. I'm sorry. No teatrix. No long explanations. Just a sentence that carried decades. It was, in its own way, an admission. I bristled at the odd smallness of it. Was that all? A sentence placed like an apology in a museum piece. Beautiful, distant, cold? He spoke again, quieter. I have been awful in ways I didn't understand, and in ways I did. There was no defense left, only the bare structure of a man admitting errors. I could see the calculations fall from his face. There was a relief in that exposure, strangely human. I answered simply, because the years taught me new things about words. You hurt me, Ethan. Deeply. But I am not that hurt person anymore. I did not forgive him publicly. I did not invite him to dinner. I left the conversation with a peace that would have been impossible in those earlier days when my identity had been tangled with betrayal. He nodded, and in that nod was 1,000 small truths, often too late, sometimes never fully paid. If there is a moral here, or a lesson for anyone listening, it is not a clean one. Friendship can be stolen by charm. Talent is not the same as integrity. The people closest to you, the ones who stand beside you during small, private battles, can still cut you, deliberately or by accident. And yet, the things that rebuild you are even smaller. An elderly customer's gratitude, a friend's folder of inconvenient truth, a pottery class, the smell of a baby at 2 in the morning. Recovery is not dramatic. It is not the movie montage of triumphant music. It is a million small, stubborn acts of staying, of learning, of saying yes to life when the instinct is to say no. I do not tell this story to vilify Ethan. He did not invent every darkness in the world. He was, only, a human being who chose some selfish paths. I tell it because someone out there might be sitting in a room where their world feels broken, thinking the end is near. It is not. There is no neat revenge waiting like a coin at the bottom of a fountain. But there is patience, work, and slow rebuilding. There is help to be asked for, if you can speak it aloud. There are people who will notice, in their ordinary ways, and choose to be kind. Now, when Nora takes my hand on Sunday mornings and asks for one more story before sleep, I tell her about small things, the robin who nests in the roof, the sound of rain on the tin, how to thread a needle without pricking your finger. When I close my eyes, I still sometimes taste the bitterness of those early betrayals. The memory of Lila's face, the quickness of Ethan's grin, the smell of investor dinners, those things never totally disappear. But they no longer have the power to define the shape of my days. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the man Ethan must have become. I picture him in a big house, reading his motivational quotes, a life carefully rearranged. I feel little pricks of anger, sometimes, then curiosity. How do you become someone who chooses the small cruelty? How do you rationalize it? I do not know. I only know this. In the end, the person you choose to be matters far more than the person who hurt you. So if you're listening to this story, and you're thinking about quitting, don't. Sit with the small things, and the people who hold them. Build slowly. The backstab hurts like a burn. It marks you. But like scars, it becomes part of your texture, part of what you now are, and one day, you will wear it like armor that no longer weighs you down. You will sit in a kitchen with the sunlight on the table, laugh about a joke no one else remembers, and in that small, ordinary breath, you will find your life again. And if somehow you run into your betrayer, if they say, "I'm sorry" across the old years, you will feel the urge to tear down their apology. But instead, maybe, you will nod, maybe you will keep walking. Maybe you will let the past sit where it belongs, behind you. That is not weakness. That is survival. That, finally, is freedom.